Graham Ashford, the arrogant CEO of a dying firm, was weeks from ruin. His final hope was a $500 million investment from Phoenix Capital. When investor Zara Joshua arrived, Graham saw a college intern and sneeringly refused her handshake. He chose his prejudice over his lifeline. Moments later, the viral footage hit the news. The woman he humiliated holds the single signature required to save his entire company. By tomorrow morning, a disgraced Graham must fly across the country and beg for an audience. The money is secondary now. The price for his public, prejudiced downfall will be far higher than he can possibly imagine. The story is getting interesting. Ensure to subscribe, like and share the video, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Graham Ashford had just bought himself 57 more days of dread. That was the magic number, the exact count of sunrises remaining before Ashford Capital ran out of cash. Below 50 days, the firm would be forced to file bankruptcy, sending over 3,000 employees home and destroying Graham's father's legacy in one humiliating, self-inflicted stroke. He had been born into this financial empire, groomed since birth to control the reins of wealth, but now he was watching it dissolve, not through market collapse, but through a slow, agonizing hemorrhage of his own making. He had pitched to 20 firms in the last 7 months. Each meeting had gone precisely the same way. Graham would talk for an hour, detailing his vision for the next generation of asset management, projecting an air of supreme confidence that bordered on aggressive arrogance. Each time, the investors sat back, listened, and then passed. The rejections were rarely direct. They used terms like cultural misalignment and leadership risk, but Graham had caught the real reason in a leaked email from a rival firm's analyst. Ashford is a liability. His attitude is radioactive. He shredded the printout, telling himself these people didn't understand the necessary swagger of a true innovator. He couldn't afford to worry about feelings when the market was waiting to be exploited. But the market, it seemed, was exploiting him. The only name left on his list, the absolute last resort, was Phoenix Capital, and their managing partner was Zara Joshua. Zara Joshua was not born with a legacy. She was a self-made force of nature who had climbed out of Baltimore's forgotten neighborhoods with a full scholarship to Stanford, a mind built for algorithms, and a relentless focus that made her a legend on Wall Street. At 40, she commanded Phoenix Capital, managing $3.8 billion in assets and boasting a return rate that embarrassed the old guard. Graham knew her story only in abstracts. A brilliant, black woman who had made an obscene amount of money in fintech and now ran her own fund. He had barely scanned the briefing Mia, his assistant, had prepared. He'd seen the numbers. The $500 million Series C was exactly what he needed, and mentally checked the box. He assumed she'd be easy to impress, eager to join the establishment he represented. He pictured a woman in a severe, expensive suit, desperate for his validation. He'd barely glanced at the photo provided. He was wrong on every count. Zara had developed a personal rule in the viper's nest of high finance, the test of the suit. After years of seeing her ideas dismissed by men who only listened once they saw the net worth displayed in her tailoring, she now dressed for major first contact meetings in perfectly clean, but purposefully casual, attire. A high-quality knit shirt, tailored trousers, perhaps a light blazer, but never the Wall Street uniform. Her objective was simple. She wanted to filter out the investors and CEOs whose respect was conditional on status markers. Those who respected the ideas and the person behind them got the money. Those who judged based on appearances or bias were instantly disqualified. It was a test of character she had never seen fail. This morning, as she waited for the elevator, she looked at her watch. She was 2 minutes late, a small, intentional detail to gauge her reception. Graham Ashford was the 21st pitch she had screened, and the firm's troubling internal culture report, which documented repeated complaints of microaggressions against employees of color and women, had her already leaning toward no. The only question was how he would fail. When Zara approached Graham and extended her hand, she wasn't just offering a greeting. She was offering him the key to survival. When he recoiled, refusing the handshake and launching into his dismissive, sneering insult. He wasn't just being arrogant. He was choosing to honor his own deep-seated prejudice and classism over the life of his company. He was failing the only test that mattered, and in that moment, the $500 million was already gone. Graham Ashford had just ensured that his firm's lifeline was severed, leaving his signature dangling, worthless, 24 hours too late. The clock on the wall read 9:02 a.m. Graham was not a man who appreciated lateness, even 2 minutes of it, especially from a vendor, which is how he mentally categorized anyone coming to him for money, even if that money was his last hope. He was standing with his 2 senior partners, the desperation of the firm's financial status hidden behind the facade of a casual Friday morning chat. Zara stepped off the elevator with a quiet confidence that Graham immediately misread as insolence. She wasn't wearing a suit. She wore tailored black trousers, a silk blend blouse in a deep sapphire color, and a sleek, modern watch. It was professional, but it was not the Wall Street uniform. To Graham, it was a deliberate act of disrespect, an instant signal that this was a person who didn't understand the rules of his world. She approached his group directly. "Mr. Ashford, Zara Joshua," she stated, her voice clear and measured, extending her hand, a simple, universal gesture of trust and equal footing. "I'm here for the Series C discussion." Graham's laughter, which had been loud and self-satisfied moments before, cut out entirely. He looked at her outstretched hand, then back up at her, a slow, contemptuous look that began at her shoes and ended at her eyes. He kept his own hands clasped tightly over his chest, refusing the connection. His eyes hardened. "You've clearly wandered into the wrong floor, or perhaps the wrong building," he said, his tone dripping with dismissive authority. His partners exchanged uncomfortable glances. "We're expecting a principal investor from Phoenix Capital, someone who understands that a meeting of this magnitude calls for a degree of professionalism. We are certainly not expecting a college intern running errands." He smiled, a cold, empty flash of teeth. The insult was not just about the clothes. It was about the color of her skin, the casual arrogance of his assumption that a woman who looked like her could not possibly hold the power she claimed. Zara stood perfectly still. She retracted her hand slowly, bringing it back to her side. She met his gaze, not with anger, but with a profound, almost clinical pity. "Mr. Ashford," she said, her voice remaining level, "I suggest you check your meeting notes one last time." Graham, feeling a surge of power from his partner's silent submission, cut her off. "I said get out now? Security will be here in a moment." He turned his back, addressing his partners as if Zara had already vanished. "Some people simply do not understand who belongs here." Zara didn't argue, didn't raise her voice, and didn't wait for security. She simply pivoted and walked back toward the elevator, her back straight. As she stepped into the car, she pulled her phone from her pocket and fired off a 2-word text message to Victor, her analyst. "Deal off." On the floor, Graham was still basking in the glow of his supposed dominance, unaware that a young female analyst had discreetly recorded the entire exchange on her phone. He had just ensured that his firm's final, critical capital injection was gone forever. The decision was made. The $500 million was lost. And Zara Joshua walked out of Ashford Capital, leaving behind a man who had chosen his prejudice over his company's survival. The elevator doors had barely closed behind Zara Joshua when the celebratory smirk began to fade from Graham Ashford's face. He knew, intellectually, that he shouldn't have been that dismissive, but the momentary feeling of superiority had been too satisfying to resist. He turned to his partners, ready to offer a cutting remark about the audacity of the younger generation, when his assistant, Mia, rushed up to him, her face a mask of frantic concern. "Mr. Ashford, I need to show you something," she whispered, her voice tight with panic. Graham, irritated by the interruption, snatched the tablet from her hand. "What is so urgent, Mia? Can't you see I'm managing a—" The rest of the sentence died in his throat. The screen was open to a news aggregate from The Information, a publication he respected, and the headline seemed to physically punch the air from his lungs. Zara Joshua, Wall Street's quiet powerhouse, secures record close for Phoenix Capital. Beneath the headline was a large, high-resolution photo. It was the woman he had just publicly humiliated, the very woman he had called an intern. He scanned the text, his eyes darting frantically across the screen, his polished composure dissolving into a cold wave of nausea. Zara Joshua, managing partner of Phoenix Capital, overseeing $3.8 billion in assets, one of the most successful black women in finance. His hands were starting to shake. The article detailed her rise, her algorithms, her reputation for ruthlessly intelligent investing, and the massive deals she had just closed. The $500 million she had been prepared to invest in Ashford Capital was not a lifeline to her. It was a rounding error. The meeting was confirmed for 9 a.m., Mr. Ashford, Mia said, her voice barely audible. I sent the full briefing, the Forbes profile, everything, 3 weeks ago. It specified Ms. Joshua would be attending. Graham didn't hear her. He was staring at the number, $3.8 billion AUM. He had laughed at $3.8 billion. He had turned his back on the only person who could save his father's legacy. He fumbled with his phone, his mind racing to formulate an excuse, a retraction, anything. He had to stop her. He had to fix this now. He punched the number for Phoenix Capital, demanding to be connected to Zara Joshua. The line clicked once, then twice, and a cool, automated voice informed him. The mailbox for Ms. Joshua is currently full and cannot accept new messages. He tried her direct mobile line, the one Mia had managed to procure for emergencies. It rang once, then went straight to voicemail. Graham ended the call, sweat beading on his forehead, and frantically tried again. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. She was blocking him. Or, worse, she had already switched off her professional lines, erasing him from her thoughts as easily as he had dismissed her from his lobby. The moment he had destroyed his firm was not when the bank account balance ticked below the danger zone, or when the market shifted. It was 2 minutes ago, when he stood in the lobby, refused a handshake, and chose his prejudice over his survival. He looked down at the tablet screen again, the image of Zara Joshua, dignified, powerful, and utterly indifferent to his looming collapse, staring back at him. The man who had been in control all his life had lost everything in one fatal, arrogant assumption. The clock had not even ticked past 10 a.m., but the firestorm was already consuming Ashford Capital. Graham, slumped in his leather chair, his tailored suit feeling suddenly heavy and ridiculous, watched the news reports begin to roll in. The short video clip, filmed by the nervous analyst and quickly disseminated across social media, was a brutal, unedited indictment. It showed him, Graham Ashford, the privileged heir of a banking dynasty, refusing the handshake, his face a mask of scorn, delivering the lines. We are certainly not expecting a college intern running errands. Security, get this individual out. The clip had gone viral within the hour, amplified by Zara Joshua's silence and the immediate, staggering context provided by her Forbes profile. The narrative was instant and damning. Billionaire black investor racially profiled and turned away by desperate white CEO. The comments section was a torrent of righteous fury. Asterisk, a walking stereotype. He deserved to go bankrupt. Dignity over capital. The names of Graham and Ashford Capital were trending globally. Every article covering the firm now carried the headline and the embedded video, painting him not as an ambitious CEO, but as a small-minded bigot who chose his prejudice over the survival of his company. Then the phone rang. It wasn't an automated voicemail or an angry email. It was Richard Thorne, the chairman of the Ashford Capital Board, and his voice was cold, sharp, and entirely devoid of pleasantries. Graham, Richard began. Turn your computer off and listen to me. I've just hung up with Phoenix Capital. The deal is dead. They are not returning calls, not accepting apologies, and frankly, they shouldn't. Graham weakly tried to interject. Richard, I know it was a mistake, but I can fix this. I'll issue a statement. I'll fly to New York. You will do nothing. Richard cut him off, his voice rising. You didn't just insult an investor, Graham. You embarrassed the firm on a global scale, and, in doing so, you confirmed every single toxic culture flag that's been raised against you for months. That footage is not going away. Our clients are already calling, demanding assurances. Richard paused, and the silence on the line was thick with finality. The board held an emergency meeting 10 minutes ago. We are unanimous. Effective immediately, you are on forced leave. Your access will be cut in 20 minutes. You are to make no further statements, issue no apologies, and speak to no one until we finalize the terms of your resignation. You killed this company, Graham. You killed your father's legacy over a handshake. The line went dead. Graham stared at his phone, the weight of the receiver suddenly immense. It wasn't just the company that had collapsed. It was his entire identity, the lifelong assurance that his name and status made him untouchable. He had been so arrogant, so convinced of his superiority, that he had alienated the one person who held his fate in her hand. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. His arrogance had not only made him lose the $500 million, but it had also cost him the CEO's seat, his reputation, and his firm. His world had not just tilted, it had completely fallen over, and it was all his own doing. Graham moved on instinct, fueled by panic and the absolute certainty that if he didn't physically put himself in front of Zara Joshua, his life was over. The board had stripped his access, but they hadn't yet stopped his private jet. Within 3 hours of Richard Thorne's call, Graham was airborne, heading to New York. He instructed his pilot to land at the closest private terminal to Phoenix Capital's headquarters. He didn't book a meeting, didn't call ahead, and didn't bother checking into a hotel. He simply grabbed a taxi and went straight to the anonymous, towering glass building that housed Zara Joshua's office. The lobby of Phoenix Capital was a study in minimalism, cold, quiet, and designed to convey efficiency, not prestige. There was no opulent ornamentation, just polished granite and a severe security desk. Graham approached the receptionist, attempting to inject some of his old CEO authority into his voice. Graham Ashford. I need to see Ms. Joshua immediately. It's urgent business regarding Ashford Capital. The receptionist, a young woman with a calm, unhurried demeanor, consulted a screen. I have no appointments for a Mr. Ashford today. Do you have a prior arrangement? No, but this is a matter of hundreds of millions of dollars. It's absolutely critical, Graham insisted, the desperation seeping through his tone. The receptionist simply smiled politely. I'm sorry, sir. Ms. Joshua's schedule is entirely booked. You are welcome to wait in the seating area. And so, Graham waited. He sat on the uncomfortable, low-leather couch, a white CEO of a failing firm, waiting for an audience with the black woman he had dismissed as an intern just hours earlier. He watched the world of Phoenix Capital move around him, analysts in casual, high-end clothes moving swiftly, whispering into phones, carrying folders thick with wealth. No one glanced twice at him. He was just another supplicant, stripped of his power, utterly dependent on the mercy of the person he had insulted. The lobby became a physical manifestation of his reverse status. He had Mia arrange for an extravagant bouquet of flowers, white roses, classic and safe, and a note to be hand-delivered. The note was terse, pleading, stripped of his usual bombast. Ms. Joshua, my behavior this morning was indefensible. I understand the gravity of my error. I beg for 15 minutes of your time to make a sincere apology and discuss the future of Ashford Capital. Graham Ashford. He watched the security guard hand the flowers and the envelope to the receptionist. 10 minutes later, the receptionist returned the note, folded neatly, and placed it back on the desk. The flowers were gone. Graham sat there for 3 agonizing hours. He watched the lunch rush. He watched the security shifts change, and he felt the sheer, raw humiliation of his situation. His phone, which used to ring constantly, remained silent, his power neutralized. Finally, just after 2 p.m., the calm receptionist approached him again. Mr. Ashford, Ms. Joshua's assistant, Victor, is willing to see you. You have 5 minutes. Victor, a polite man in his late 20s, met Graham in a small, windowless conference room. He did not offer a handshake. Mr. Ashford, Ms. Joshua is aware you are here, Victor stated simply. She has declined to meet with you, as the investment is closed. However, she understands the dire situation of your employees. She will grant you an audience tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. to discuss the matter. But you need to understand one thing very clearly. This meeting is not about the money. It is about accountability." Victor paused, letting the words hang in the air. "The time and place will be confirmed later this evening. If you missed that meeting for any reason, all discussion ends permanently." Graham swallowed hard, his throat dry. He managed to nod, the weight of his defeat heavy on his shoulders. He had his 15 minutes, not granted by right, but by a gesture of mercy rooted in the dignity of the person he had scorned. He had his lifeline, but the price, he knew, would be far higher than $500 million. The next morning, Graham arrived at the anonymous address Victor had provided, a private meeting room tucked away in a downtown Manhattan hotel, far from the polished chaos of Wall Street. He wore a crisp, dark suit, the antithesis of his arrogant casualness yesterday, and carried only a notebook, stripped down to the essentials of a man facing judgment. Zara Joshua was already seated at the table. She was dressed today in an impeccably tailored navy suit, symbolizing the professional authority he had failed to recognize the day before. She did not stand when he entered, nor did she offer a greeting. There was no one else in the room. Graham sat opposite her, his hands clasped tightly on the table. He took a deep, steadying breath and began the speech he had rehearsed all night, a carefully constructed mea culpa designed to sound sincere while minimizing the full scope of his error. "Ms. Joshua, first and foremost, I came here to offer a profound and unqualified apology. What happened yesterday was entirely my fault. I was under immense pressure and I made a catastrophic error in judgment regarding your identity and your status. It was a massive oversight, and I am deeply sorry for the disrespect I showed to Phoenix Capital and to you personally. I hope that you can see that this was a mistake, an unfortunate, isolated incident, and that we can move past it to discuss the future of the firm." Zara listened in total silence, her expression perfectly neutral. When he finished, the silence stretched, heavy and unbroken. Finally, she leaned forward, her eyes locking on his. "Mr. Ashford, let me stop you right there." Her voice was low and firm. "Your apology is accepted, but you are wrong about one thing. It was not a mistake in judgment. It was not an oversight. And it was certainly not an unfortunate, isolated incident." Graham felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. You saw a black woman in professional, but not conventional, business attire, and your immediate, unthinking reaction was to dismiss her as a subordinate. You looked at my face, my clothes, and decided that my presence was an insult and that I was unworthy of respect. You chose to be arrogant and bigoted over being professional. That wasn't a mistake. That was bias, Zara stated, delivering the word like a physical blow. A bias, which, as the cultural audit of your firm confirms, is systemic at Ashford Capital, starting with you. She pushed a document across the table. It was the term sheet, but stapled to the first page was an addendum, titled The Accountability Contract. "I am still prepared to invest the full $500 million, she said, her voice dropping to a decisive pitch. "But only if you agree to every single condition outlined in this addendum. They are non-negotiable, and they start immediately." Graham quickly scanned the page, his face growing paler with each bullet point. 1. Public apology and admission. You must hold a press conference within 48 hours and issue a full public apology. You must use the words, "I racially profiled Zara Joshua," and admit that your actions were driven by deep-seated bias. 2. Immediate resignation. You must resign as CEO of Ashford Capital effective immediately. You may transition to a non-executive, advisory role only after 1 year of demonstrable commitment to the terms herein. 3. Cultural audit implementation. You must agree to fully fund and immediately implement every recommendation from the internal cultural audit, including mandatory diversity training and the overhaul of hiring and promotion structures. 4. Board and executive diversification. Within 6 months, the board of directors and the executive team must reflect a minimum of 40% representation of individuals from historically marginalized backgrounds, selected by Phoenix Capital. 5. Personal financial commitment. You must make a personal, non-tax-deductible donation of $10 million to a social justice fund focused on racial equity, administered by a third-party nonprofit of Phoenix Capital's choosing. Graham's breath hitched at the final point. $10 million. It was a staggering amount, a severe personal penalty that would hurt his net worth. The resignation was the final, total surrender of the power he had spent his entire life accumulating. This was not a business negotiation. It was a demand for penance. He looked up at Zara, ready to argue, to negotiate the donation, to plead for his CEO role. I need your signature on this addendum right now, Graham. Zara cut him off, her tone leaving no room for discussion. If you refuse one single term, you leave this room, and I initiate a full liquidation of every debt we hold in Ashford Capital by 5 p.m. today. The firm collapses. The choice is simple. Save your company and sacrifice your ego, or save your ego and destroy everything. Graham's hand trembled as he reached for the pen. He was a man who had always chosen himself, his pride, and his own gain. But looking at the document, he saw not just the $500 million, but the faces of 3,000 employees, the legacy of his family, and the brutal consequence of his arrogance. He signed the document with a shaky, furious flourish. The signature he had refused to give 24 hours ago, the signature on the term sheet, was now his only lifeline. It bought the firm's survival, but at the cost of his power and his dignity. Graham stood before the bank of cameras, fluorescent lights bleaching the color from his face. This was not the kind of press conference he was accustomed to. No champagne, no applause, no celebration of a triumphant deal. This was a forced surrender, staged in the sterile, low-ceilinged media room of Ashford Capital, orchestrated entirely by Phoenix Capital's legal team. Next to him sat his lawyer and Richard Thorne, the board chairman, both looking like pallbearers at a hurried funeral. He gripped the edges of the podium, his hands clammy. The room was packed with reporters, their faces a blur of anticipation and judgment. The viral video had ensured maximum turnout. He could feel the weight of every camera lens, every phone recording, all waiting for the moment of his public collapse. He opened his mouth, and the carefully crafted, legal-approved script went right out of his head. He looked at the sheet of paper, saw the required phrase, and knew he had to deliver it with the brutal honesty Zara Joshua demanded. I called this press conference today to address the incident that occurred yesterday morning. Graham began, his voice gravelly, lacking its usual commanding ring. He paused, swallowed, and forced the words out. Yesterday, I racially profiled Ms. Zara Joshua, the managing partner of Phoenix Capital, in this building. A ripple went through the crowd. Reporters frantically scribbled notes. The camera shutters clicked faster. This was not the usual corporate non-apology they expected. My actions were driven entirely by my own ingrained biases and a deeply arrogant worldview that has plagued me and, by extension, this company for years, he continued, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. I made a prejudiced assumption based on how Ms. Joshua looked, dismissing her as a subordinate when in fact she was the single person holding the key to this firm's future. I chose my ego over the livelihoods of 3,000 employees, and for that, I am profoundly sorry. He looked directly into the center camera, imagining Zara Joshua watching. My apology is not a request for forgiveness. It is a statement of fact and a promise of accountability. Then, he delivered the second blow, the official act of total surrender. Effective immediately, I am resigning as the Chief Executive Officer of Ashford Capital. I will have no executive authority and will step away from daily operations. The board has accepted my resignation. Richard Thorne immediately stepped up to the microphone, his expression stern, confirming the leadership transition and the details of the agreement. The $500 million investment, the immediate implementation of the cultural audit, and the new mandate for diversity. The board was saving the firm, but in doing so, they were publicly executing the old regime. As Richard spoke, Graham remained standing, absorbing the humiliating, searing gaze of the world. His power was gone, his reputation in ruins, but the firm, the legacy, was saved. It was a transaction he had fought his whole life to avoid, the sacrifice of himself for the greater good. He had been stripped, on camera, in front of the world, and there was no hiding the raw, exposed truth. He was a failure who had to be saved by the person he had insulted. The public reckoning was complete, and the long, painful work of transformation was just beginning. Phoenix Capital's wire transfer landed in Ashford Capital's bank account 24 hours after Graham's televised resignation. The $500 million was real, the firm was stabilized, and the immediate threat of insolvency vanished. Yet, the price of that rescue was only just beginning to be paid. Graham had been stripped of his executive privileges and relegated to an unmarked, small office on a lower floor. The board, now heavily influenced by Richard Thorne and Phoenix Capital's investment terms, appointed an interim CEO and immediately initiated the full cultural audit. The findings were not surprising to Zara Joshua, but they were a damning indictment of Graham's reign. The report painted a picture of systemic exclusion. Black employees and women were consistently passed over for promotion. Their salaries lagged behind their white male counterparts, and the internal environment was characterized by constant, low-grade microaggressions. Phoenix Capital's legal team oversaw the implementation of the corrective measures. The board was diversified, bringing in 3 new members chosen for their expertise in corporate governance and DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. The search for a permanent, new CEO focused almost exclusively on experienced, non-white candidates. For Graham, the internal transformation was even more brutal than the public one. He was required to attend intensive, mandatory bias coaching, led by a firm specializing in corporate accountability. The sessions were not therapy or gentle seminars. They were forensic examinations of his privilege and prejudice. In a small, cold room, he was forced to watch his viral video repeatedly, dissecting his sneer, his language, and his underlying assumptions. He read the anonymous employee reviews, the ones he had dismissed as disgruntled, and saw the true human cost of his arrogance. The coach made him confront the reality that his wealth and social standing had insulated him from the consequences of his actions for 40 years, until Zara Joshua finally held him to account. His social life evaporated. Friends stopped calling. The exclusive clubs he belonged to quietly suspended his membership. The $10 million personal donation to the Social Justice Fund, which Phoenix Capital made sure was tracked publicly, was a constant, tangible reminder of his penance. But the company changed. Under the new interim leadership, Ashford Capital began to breathe. New talent, diverse and energized, was hired and rapidly promoted. The toxic atmosphere receded, replaced by a sense of earned respect. Graham, unable to manage or command, was forced to observe the success his absence created. He started spending his days reading the books and articles assigned by his coach, absorbing the painful truth that his vision was never as important as the dignity of the people he employed. Graham Ashford was no longer the all-powerful CEO. He was just a man doing the difficult, daily, often humiliating work of transformation, finding a strange, new purpose in confronting the very biases that had nearly destroyed him. He had signed the contract to save the firm. Now, he was realizing the terms of that contract were forcing him to save himself. 1 year later, the lobby of Ashford Capital felt like a different universe. Gone was the anxious, entitled energy of Graham's reign. In its place was a quiet, diverse confidence. The firm, now helmed by Aisha Khan, a brilliant, no-nonsense CEO brought in directly from a Phoenix Capital recommendation, was thriving. They hadn't just staved off bankruptcy. They had secured 3 successful new funding rounds, and their stock was up 40%, a testament to the belief that good character eventually yields good business. The occasion was the firm's annual investor summit, and the keynote speaker was Zara Joshua herself, presenting on the long-term value of equitable governance. Graham Ashford, now serving as a non-executive board chair, stood off to the side, wearing a suit that was still tailored but lacked its old defiant swagger. His presence was a deliberate choice by Aisha Khan, a visible, living monument to the firm's cultural reckoning. He was still wealthy, still a power player, but his authority was derived now not from his name, but from his earned commitment to the terms of the accountability contract. He watched Zara step off the stage, fielding quick, respectful questions from a throng of admiring investors. She was a celebrity in this new ecosystem, a symbol of finance with conscience. He saw his moment and approached her, his hands out of his pockets this time, open and waiting. "Ms. Joshua," he said, his voice respectful and steady. "That was an exceptional address. I wanted to thank you for coming." Zara turned to him. She didn't smile, but her eyes held a neutral, assessing light. She saw the change in him, the absence of the sneer, the humility that felt real, not performative. She saw a man who had done the work, a man whose pain had produced tangible results. She extended her hand. Graham met her handshake, a firm, professional grip that was the antithesis of their first encounter. It was a shared moment of closure, not granted due to his status, but earned through his self-immolation and subsequent commitment to reform. "Mr. Ashford," Zara replied, her tone softening slightly. "Ashford Capital is flourishing. You kept your word. The culture report from this quarter shows real progress." "That progress belongs to Aisha and the new team," Graham said honestly. "And to the contract you forced me to sign. It saved the firm, and, ironically, it saved me from myself." Zara nodded, looking past him to the diverse faces filling the thriving room. "Accountability is a continuous practice, Graham, but it's a good start." She leaned in, her final words quiet, meant only for him. "Remember this. I came that day with $500 million, and you saw an intern. The lesson is simple, Graham, and it's the one that will keep your firm successful. Dignity should never require a Forbes ranking. Treat the intern, the janitor, and the billionaire with the same inherent respect. Only then can you truly see who belongs in the room." She gave his hand one last squeeze, then turned and walked away, leaving Graham standing alone, fully humbled but fully alive, his penance complete and his future irrevocably altered by a handshake he had refused to give. This story reveals a stark truth. Accountability is the currency of real leadership. Graham Ashford learned that the hard way, choosing arrogance over opportunity and nearly sacrificing his entire legacy. But Zara Joshua, with her $500 million, showed us that power means nothing if it isn't rooted in respect. His journey, from privileged contempt to earned humility, proves that change is possible, but it requires facing your worst self in public. Never let your bias blind you. The person you dismiss today might be the only one who can save you tomorrow. Dignity is not negotiable. If this story gripped you, don't miss the next one. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful narratives where arrogance meets its match and justice is served. Turn on the notifications bell so you don't miss out, because accountability never takes a day off. Drop a comment below. Have you ever been judged before you spoke? Share your story below.